Hey guys, James back again with the Tundra. Just finished the water pump and timing belt on this, and it's time to bleed the cooling system. This is going to be pretty universal for most cars, besides maybe some hybrids or cars that have multiple thermostats. Bleeding is pretty straightforward on almost every car. There's a few ways to do it. One's going to involve a special tool that hooks up to compressed air, shop air. So we're not going to be doing that. We're going to be using the simple spill-free funnel, which I'll leave a link to below. So let's get started on it. First thing we need to do is fill up the coolant with the recommended type of coolant as well as level of dilution. This is a 50-50 mix. So using this kit, you'll just find the adapters that fit the radiator to get a snug fit on the seal here under the cap, as well as, the funnel's not moving around, basically, because it could potentially leak out at the bottom here. We don't want that. We want a nice tight seal. Okay, what you want to do here is basically fill the coolant level up until it stops dropping and it settles right around here at the bottom of the funnel. So the purpose of the funnel is two things. One being that you can fill the coolant without making a mess. The other is that you can bleed the system. Now in this system and in most systems, the radiator opening is the highest point in the system. So naturally anything type of air is going to want to come to the surface, just like when you're underwater. Life preservers are filled with air and they want to come to the top. It's the same thing here. Any air that's trapped in here is going to want to find its way to the highest point in the system, which at this point is here. Some cars will have bleeder screws, which can aid in the process. They're typically somewhere around a coolant aluminum housing or something like that, maybe around the radiator hose or around the thermostat. It's just a tiny little bleeder screw. It looks similar to a brake bleeding screw. I cannot find one on this car, and that's okay because I don't think it will be necessary. So I've got the level filled up here. I ran out of the 50-50 mix, so now I'm just mixing straight coolant with water. Once the water pump starts circulating everything, it'll get fully mixed and the color will return. Right now, just on this top level here is water. So at this point, what we want to do is go ahead and start the car. Okay, once the car's running, there's a couple things we want to do. We want to switch your AC here all the way to heat. Make sure the AC is off. Turn the fan down to low. You can turn it off too, but I like to be able to feel what's coming out of the vents. What we're doing here by turning the heater on is for one, we want to feel when the air here gets hot. For two, we just want to make sure if there's any type of heater valves in the system that they get opened, and it allows coolant to circulate all the way through the cooling system, including the heater core. So we'll leave that on hot. We'll leave the fan here on low. You want to pay attention to the temperature gauge. Right now we're all the way at cold. So basically we're going to be doing this bleeding process hopefully just as long as it takes for the temperature to come all the way up to normal, whatever the normal operating temperature is. Hopefully all the air will be bled out by the time it's there. Now we need the car to come up fully to operating temperature. We want to make sure that the thermostat opens. That's going to be key to making sure that the system gets bled properly. If you have electric fans, which this truck does not, you'll want to make sure that you continue the process all the way until the electric fans start coming on by themselves without the AC turned on. Back here on the outside of the truck, we want to keep an eye on the coolant level here. What we're looking for is bubbles. So each little bubble you see there is air escaping from the cooling system. That's what we want. So the end goal here, once all the air has been bled out, the truck should be up to operating temperature. If it has electric fans on it down here, then those should be cycling on and off as needed as the computer decides it wants them on or off. Like I said, no air out of here, and inside the truck the heat should be blowing fully hot as it would be if you hadn't done anything. It should be fully hot. If you're not getting hot air out of the vents, then you still have an air bubble and it needs to be worked out. So this may take a little while. Just keep an eye on the coolant level here, and as it drops down, just top it off about to that same level right there at that line. Okay, the Tundra's been running here for a few minutes. You can see we've still got some air coming out. That's fine. While you're waiting, you should look for leaks, because bleeding your system is pretty pointless if you have leaks. So if you see any coolant leaks, then you should address that before continuing. But you should probably check for leaks before you even start this. In the meantime, while it's warming up, what we can do is start feeling the radiator hoses. The top one should warm up pretty fast. The bottom one should warm up once the thermostat opens. The lower hose should start to warm up and should feel about the same temperature as the upper hose there. So if this never happens on your car, then you have to think potentially the thermostat might be stuck, or you could have a clogged radiator. So, but if you're not aware of any of those problems, if you're just doing a simple repair like a water pump or something like that, and you're just trying to bleed the system, then you shouldn't run into anything like that. So we'll let the truck heat up. We'll keep checking the hoses. Keep checking the level here. If the level starts getting really high to where it's going to overflow, you can just turn the car off. Let it sit for a minute, start it over. The level should drop once you turn the car off. Okay, as you can see, the temperature has gotten up to the middle, which should be normal operating temperature. However, the radiator hoses are still a lot different in temperature. The upper one's getting pretty warm, the lower one's still cold. So we need to keep monitoring that. Once both of the hoses feel about the same temperature, we can assume that the thermostat has opened, and we can make sure there's no air bubbles at that point. And if there's no air bubbles, then we can call it done. Okay, look at our level here. We're starting to get pretty high. I have not added any more coolant. It's just raising here on its own. The upper hose is warm. The lower is still cold. It's getting pretty high there. I'm going to go ahead and shut it off for a second and let that level drop a little bit. Alright, don't forget to keep an eye on the temperature. A big air pocket can cause the car to overheat, or if there's another problem that's associated with overheating, it could happen too if you're not paying attention. So just keep an eye on the temperature gauge. Right now we're still good. The heater is not hot yet, so let's check on that. See, our coolant level is still good. Let's check the hoses. The upper hose is getting pretty hot. So the lower hose is just barely lukewarm, warmer than it was. Basically all that means is that the thermostat back here is probably not fully open. Let's take a look at our heater hoses. This is where the heat comes from inside the car. So on this one they're real easy to see. It's these two right here, so you can feel those. Check and see if the hoses are hot. They're kind of lukewarm, about the same as the lower radiator hose, maybe a little bit warmer. If we look over here, we can see the heater valve, which most cars don't even have anymore, but this one does. And this basically blocks the flow to the heater core, which is inside the dash. The heater core is a very high point in the system, and it can trap a lot of air. You can see we're here at almost here where the cowl is. That's how high it is, which is obviously a lot higher than the rest of the engine. So it is easy for air to get trapped in here. That's why I want the heater on. That valve has opened. If you watch, whenever I move it to cold, that thing is going to move over. So watch that real quick. So our operating temperature is still good. The heater, not really feeling anything. You can turn it up a little bit just to see. Yeah, it's still pretty cold. So if you're running into something like this and the heater's still not working, what we can do is we'll just give it a little gas. But you want to pay attention to your funnel outside. If it starts overflowing, then shut it off, let off the gas, all that good stuff. So let's just give it some gas, and we'll just monitor the heat. Okay, the air's starting to warm up. Temperature still looks good. Let's go check our coolant level and fill our hoses. Coolant level still looks good, although it has jumped up a little bit. Let's check our hoses. It's nice and hot. That one's getting there, still a little bit cooler. Fill our heater hoses. That one's pretty hot. That one's not quite as hot. So this is the inlet hose for the heater core, which you can tell because it has that valve that shuts on and off that I showed you. So this one's pretty hot. This one's not as hot. It could indicate a clog in the radiator, or I'm sorry, in the heater core. It might not be. It may just be that we're dissipating a lot of the heat out of the heater core. That's what its job is to do, is to dissipate heat into the cabin. So there's always going to be a little bit of difference between the inlet and the outlet. If it's a huge difference, then you might think that the heater core could be clogged. But we won't worry about that just yet. If we get good heat out of the vents, then we'll call it good. Alright, so we're just about finished here. The engine is maintaining operating temperature. The heat from the vents is nice and hot, even at idle. If the heat is only hot when you have the gas push, when you have the engine RPM raised, then you likely still have a flow problem, whether it be air in the system, a restriction, or a thermostat that is not opened. Okay, out here we can see the coolant level is pretty much maintained where it wants to be. We still got a few air bubbles, so we'll let those work out for a couple minutes. Once this is pretty much done with the air bubbles, then we can turn it off. We'll check the hoses again. Nice and hot. Lower hose, getting there. Heater hoses, very hot there. So circulation through the heater core is good. Those hoses are about the same temperature. I don't think our thermostat's fully open yet, and that's probably because it's a cool day. You'll notice the colder it is outside, the harder it is for your engine just to sit here idle and warm up. This one warmed up pretty fast, but some cars will not warm up that fast, and you may need to keep your foot on the gas for quite a while in order to get all the air worked out. So we're going to look back here at the coolant. Notice that the level has dropped a bit, and we're getting quite a few bubbles. Normally when the level drops, it means either one, it's working air out, or two, the thermostat's opening more. Either way, it's a good sign. We want to see it drop. If it gets too low, just top it off. Okay guys, we're just about finished here. Coolant level has pretty much not done anything, just sitting there, no air bubbles. All the hoses are nice and hot, so I feel like we have good flow. Like I said, if you feel like you don't have good flow, then you need to address a different issue. If it feels like all the flow is good and all the hoses are nice and hot and the heater's working and the operating temperature is staying normal, then you're probably pretty much done, assuming you're not still getting large bubbles out of the reservoir here, or the funnel rather. Last thing, make sure that you top the reservoir off to its appropriate level.